working on inducing positive changes in your brain through hypnosis and neuroplasticity is always going to make you feel better and more in charge of your life than if you don't do those things. There may be times that you don't think you need to or you don't want to, but it's only going to make your life better. That's when we manifest.
From To Be Magnetic, this is the Expanded Podcast with your host, Lacy Phillips. As the leading destination for neural manifestation, we dispel the woo-woo in order to help you create real, tangible results based on neuroplasticity, psychology, epigenetics, and energetics. Our goal is to normalize the practice of manifestation and empower you to get into the driver's seat of your life in order to manifest the experiences, relationships, and things that most align with your authenticity. Part of our manifestation process entails expanding past your limiting subconscious beliefs. Therefore, by tuning into this podcast with interviews from experts, thought leaders, spiritual teachers, scientists, and those with neural manifestation success stories, you're starting the process of expanding your subconscious in order to see to believe that anything you desire is possible. And by pressing play, the process begins.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Expanded Podcast. Jessica here. I am so excited because you guys have been asking about this forever, but today we have Dr. Swart back on the podcast. We are so happy to have her back and that our schedules aligned to record this. We work with Dr. Tara on the new Deep Imaginings that we launched for the Unblocking Challenge that are now in the daily practice. And it was so nice to get to work with her again and to also talk with her on the podcast with Lacy. This explained episode is all about aligned action. So we know we have the trifecta of manifestation: unblocking, expanding, and taking aligned action. But really aligned action is passing those tests. Maybe it's setting a boundary, potentially jumping off a cliff, maybe saying no to someone or leaving a job or taking that trip cross country, whatever it may be. But oftentimes aligned action is living in alignment and making decisions with your most authentic version of self. So sometimes the aligned action can be the smallest little piece that just is a reinforcing and reminder that you're deserving of whatever you authentically desire and want. And we're really going to dive into the neuroscience, psychology, and manifestation energetics behind this. And it comes at the perfect time because on Monday, July 11th, we are dropping the Aligned Action Deep Imagining, which will really help prime you, connect to your intuition, understand what action you need to take, and help you face any fear or resistance that's coming up against taking that action. It is a super powerful DI. I'm so excited to share it with you guys. It is going to be coming out on the last week of our Unblocking Challenge. And before you guys write me in this question, because I know it's coming, yes, you can still access the Unblocking Challenge after next week. So if you are in the pathway, the Unblocking Challenge is completely free. It's where you take one core wound that is blocking your manifestation and hit it from multiple different DIs and multiple different journal prompts and really clear it so you can connect with your manifestation on the other side. So if you haven't joined yet, it is honestly not too late and not even close to too late. It is a 6-week challenge, but we're going to have it available in the pathway until the end of September. So that means you have all summer long to keep coming back to this challenge to really carve out either different core wounds. Maybe you're working on another workshop right now. You want to finish that first and then jump into the challenge. But either way, I highly recommend jumping on board at some point during this summer because it is going to super speed your manifestation process. All of the DIs are so supportive right now. It kind of feels like the world is in flux and crazy, and there's just so many things going on, and it can feel really heavy sometimes. And I personally am just so thankful that we have the fear and anxiety DI and the safe place DI to go back to and ground when things are feeling super heavy and overwhelming, especially when you're constantly see news cycle headlines in your phone all the time. So I'm just really thankful we have it this summer, not only to super speed our manifestation process, but also to support us during any difficult feelings we might be feeling during this time. If you are not in the pathway yet, I highly suggest signing up now because we have our biggest summer sale going on right now, and it is ending July 15th. This is going to be your last chance to lock in a rate this low. So even if you're not ready to jump into the unblocking challenge yet, or you have vacation, or you're waiting for, maybe you want to do this in August, totally fine. But I suggest signing up now so you can lock in that low rate, and then you can utilize the pathway at any point in time during your year membership. You can find more details about the sale in the midroll as well as in the link in show notes. Stay tuned after the episode. I'm going to share a little manifestation that came through for me already in the unblocking challenge and any tips to help you guys through this next week. And without further ado, here is Explained Aligned Action. So excited today because we have Dr. Tara back on the roundtable of Explained. Welcome back, Dr. Tara. How are you?
I'm good. I'm so excited to be back as well, especially after having actually met you both in LA.
Yes, she's back. Everybody's been asking. It's been a long time, even on Ask Me Anything. So be like, is Dr. Tara coming back? And we're like, we can't say much, but she is.
Yeah, it's so nice that everyone's been asking. We really appreciate that, don't we, as a group?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, well, and we were really excited because we got to collaborate with you on our recent unblocking challenge and our DIs that we released. And we polled our Instagram to see kind of what questions you guys had for Dr. Tara coming back on the Explained, and then also anything related to the challenge. And one big thing that we were noticing is understanding a little bit deeper aligned action. And now we can dive into the neuroscience, psychology, and the energetics of aligned action and why it is such a vital piece in manifestation. So one thing I just want to point out before we jump into is, Dr. Tara, when we were going through especially the unblocked DI, but a lot of the other DIs, we wanted to make sure we were hitting on the 4 steps of how to reprogram a neural pathway. And so the 4 steps of raised awareness, focused attention, deliberate practice, and accountability. And so we really baked that into the unblocking process. Do you want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good time, especially because it's been a while since I've been on the Explained episodes, to just reiterate that 4-step process for creating a new neural pathway, which is very much part of the foundational bundle of workshops. But we've kind of brought it back again new very strongly here. And so in the journal prompts, we're bringing the raised awareness. And in each DI, we're bringing it to a core wound and how that's playing out in your life. And then during the DI, we're giving it focused attention in the subconscious and helping to heal whilst also implanting an empowering belief. And then taking that into real life, you'll put the new belief into deliberate practice by taking action in alignment with your true self and not in alignment with the old belief. Or at the very least, noticing when you are defaulting to the old belief and just using that as data to move forward with more deliberate practice in true alignment. And, I'm really strong on writing in your journal, but also reading back over it with the community, with friends, with an accountability partner. You can be held accountable and hold yourself accountable to maintaining this new way of being, which then further strengthens the neural pathway.
It's so cool how both the reprogramming work and then once that it's created, through that subconscious work, but then it really takes putting it into practice in real life to kind of like solidify that new pathway so it becomes the default.
Yeah, completely, because the old pathway has been there for a long time. So you need to make this one stronger than the one that you've been strengthening, probably not consciously, but perhaps your whole life. So that deliberate practice piece is really important. And like I said, if not, then why not? And learning, why you're defaulting and then using that information to help you to solidify this pathway more and more.
Lacy, from an energetics perspective, when we're thinking about creating those new neural pathways and then the aligned action piece, because aligned action and blocking is part of that sort of trifecta for manifesting, how does even from the energetic realm, they all go together?
Well, what I find to be really interesting is I find with aligned action, what we can, describe that as it's like jumping off of cliffs for sure. But a lot of the time, and this I think goes really hand in hand with what you're talking about, Dr. Tara, is that most often than not, it's us not settling for the things that we used to settle for in the past. So passing tests. And so to me, the way that I view aligned action, it's the actual dance with the universe. So it's actually if we're communicating to the universe, if we're in our worth or not, period. So it's like when we're unblocking, for instance, in the subconscious plane, which is a lot of what we're talking about. If we're unblocking, that's us actually dusting out the cobwebs and moving out the literal loops we have going on that are pushing what we want away from us, that are communicating, I'm not worthy of this, I can't have this, I'm not lovable for this, etc. And then the expanding piece is A, we've never even seen to believe that what we want is possible, or B, we're having to build different fragments of that. So that actually creates space. So when it comes to aligned action, that piece is us actually telling the universe, I'm going to choose that I'm worthy or I'm not, period. And so what I like about the steps of unblocking in order to overwrite that neural pathway, the old one, I personally have been doing a lot of the piece where it's rereading the journal. I do it once a week. I do it once a month. And it's really, really big because if I look at that in conjunction with where I need to take aligned action, it's so funny how most often than not, what I'm writing about in my journal is the aligned action I need to take. So then I'm revisiting it, deepening the root of the new neural pathway. And then I have this moment from an energetic perspective. It's like, okay, cool. How do I want to start communicating with the universe through my actions? And even actions, people think it's this really big thing. Like it's, jumping off of a cliff, meaning leaving a job, leaving a relationship, etc. But it actually, I think the more advanced you get in manifestation, it becomes even more energetic, for a lack of a better word, and subconscious. So it's really like taking that moment, taking some inventory and going, oh, this thing that I'm asking for, is this out of ego? I was talking to somebody today who I'm very close to, and she's like, I want $1 million salary. And I'm seeing that that's not going to happen. And it's like, okay, cool. What does $1 million salary actually represent to you? Because that's just an energetic term. Money, we all know at this point, is energetic. What does that represent? What does your life look like, et cetera? And how much of the $1 million salary is actually out of ego, right? Because the universe isn't here to support our inauthentic self. It's actually here to send us tests and mirrors and things like that, opportunities to unblock that. So that example of asking for $1 million, is that to keep up with all of the fancy friends that she's been around lately? Is that to be, admired by the friends? Is that because she sees that this is a lifestyle? So when I look at that, in my mind, I'm actually seeing a lot of aligned action opportunity, not only unblocking, there's obviously childhood needs there that are wanting to be met when she's asking for that, but also is the real opportunity here to stop hanging out with maybe the friends out of ego to validate herself or wanting this thing to validate. It's so interesting how when we're looking at aligned action that, yes, it can be these big grand things of passing tests as well as jumping off cliffs, but it also can come down to that finite of energetic and simplicity to go, wait, I've been operating this way. I think I need this thing to be lovable, but let me actually dig down below because it's going to show me how to operate differently, getting into that dance with the universe. Even that is aligned action, right? And she's like taking big moves right now. She's like, oh my gosh, I've been looking at finances all wrong. I need to sell the fancy car to like put everything in order. You know what I mean? And that is creating magnetism, changing the pattern, changing the way that we continue to behave to actually create our own authentic path. So I just wanted to talk about that and cover that a little bit. When we're looking at aligned action from an energetic perspective, it's not always just the huge test. It's not always the jumping off the cliffs. Sometimes it's like rearranging behavior because it's been mostly out of ego, or it's been out of settling for too long for something, or out of trying to get, even this is usually what ego is, trying to get needs met from a parent that we aren't even conscious of yet. So I love the steps of unblocking. And then I also love the microscope of looking even deeper at these hairline energetic roots of how we're behaving. And also, it's not going to solve the intention, because when she actually looked at all of this, what does that $1 million actually represent for your authentic code? When I look at me, right, when I was manifesting, I knew I wanted financial freedom. Mine always comes back down to freedom and security. And so what wealth represented to me was that I could have people delegated and supporting anything that doesn't match my authentic code. I could have nature. Like when I was manifesting Topanga, it wasn't to have like a house in Topanga. It was for nature. It was for feeling like a cottage. So it's like when we can get down to these core values, but also looking at, cool, now when you have $1 million, you're just going to be in the same financial situation. You'll just have more of it happening. So it's like, get your financial ducks in a row. And she voiced that what that meant for her was actually just joy and freedom. And I'm like, cool. You're on your path to making that $1 million salary happen. It's going to happen for you. If that's your intention and it's coming from the core places, it's just inevitable. You're a very magnetic person. However, if that's what you're manifesting, what you're manifesting is learning about investing, because then you're never reliant on a paycheck and earning. It's you're reliant on passive income.
Yeah, and I think if I was to segue that from the energetics to the perspective of neuroscience, I would really emphasize the wording which you already use, which is that it's coming from a place of authentic high self-worth. Because sometimes these lofty goals are really coming from a place of inadequacy. So, I deserve this because, but actually it's because I don't really believe I deserve it. And I think there's a couple of other elements, which is that there's yourself and then there's others, because when we try to change, especially if it's quite visible and tangible like $1 million, then people can have resistance to that, because they might then feel like you won't have anything in common, or you'll live very differently. And it's basically about setting boundaries as well for yourself in terms of not settling, but also in terms of the people that you have around you. And like you said, if you've got multi-millionaire friends around you and that's why you want to earn £1 million, then soon that £1 million or dollars won't become enough, and you'll want $10 million because that's what you'll need for the next step. So the authentic alignment is really important. And I think there are various ways that people can do that. There's the quite well-known head, heart and gut. That's a way of saying, do I want this logically? Do I want this emotionally? Do I want this intuitively? And then in the sort of more extended neuroscience model, there's also motivation, physicality, and creativity. So, how does it feel literally, physically in your body? And like you said, what are creative ways I can make this happen without being reliant on a paycheck, which means you're not actually free.
Completely. I love too that you mentioned that, because you helped us loop that into the new Deep Imaginings.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that's a really quick and easy way for someone to say, is this aligning? Basically, it's to ferret out if there's ego involved. So if it's aligning in your head but not in your heart or your gut or both of them, then there's probably a lot of ego involved. But I also want to say that when reading back over your journal, I don't want to give people the impression that you're always going to find something bad, like I didn't set a boundary or I settled. You might find some really great examples where you can almost be your own expander of where you set a boundary and see the result that then happened.
I love that you bring that up, Dr. Tar, because I was actually reading through, I've really been on a rampage. Like you've given me this tool and I've taken it in, and I was looking back through a journal, I think of 2015. And I've heard Coach Heather Whitaker talk about this a lot. Like, you can be your own expander of the ways that you've behaved in the past or actions you've taken in areas of your life that maybe you already are very expansive. And so I happened to stumble upon that in an old journal entry where I was like, wow, back then I was really good at this thing. And now if I just look at what was I feeling, why was I so confident? Why was I so in my worth at that, and apply it to this, and a great example of that could be dating versus, coworkers. Like, I'm really good at dating or something. And so how do I apply like those boundaries and that communication style or whatever into this aspect of life? Or it could be home, somewhere maybe it's like relationship with your children or something, so it's a really good example. I love that you talk about that for people, that you'll find so many beautiful things when you start to revisit your journal. You really do. And so I think this is a really good tip for people to put into play.
I'm just going to surmise our aligned action to a definition for you guys, because I don't think we've ever done this before. But aligned action is the action that we are taking that's in alignment with our most authentic version of selves. This includes passing tests, setting boundaries, following pings, and making decisions for ourselves from a place of authentic, high self-worth. So when we think about taking the aligned action, there's some resistance, fear, maybe it's a scarcity or a lack place, or maybe people don't have clarity. They kind of get hung up on like, okay, well, what action do I take and how do I navigate it? And what does it look like to be in high self-worth on this subject? What would a person who has high self-worth on this subject act like, and what do I need to start embodying? And when you think about it from the neural perspective, you have this new neural pathway, but it's not your default yet. And so you, in the moment, might automatically, because aren't a lot of our actions, basically they're automatic. They like go back to a pathway that's so well versed that we're trying to be energy efficient as possible in our brains. And it's like, cool, we remember how to go that. Let's go to this old way of being or doing or acting or responding. What are some things that we can think about when trying to switch over to that new neural pathway in the very beginning on that aligned action that's aligned with our highest self, when it does feel so foreign and new and we're so used to, choosing the old route?
Yeah, and I think the word I would use there is the default pathway, which is the one that's the most established and the most energy efficient. And I find it's really, really useful for people to understand, because we're talking about quite intangible mental processes, that it's actually a physical structural process. You are literally connecting up neurons, like as if you were laying bricks in a pathway. And there's a critical tipping point where you have enough neurons that is now the strongest pathway. So at that point where the new pathway becomes stronger and thicker than the old pathway, that's when we manifest. But just before that is the part where we want to give up, because it's hard work. It's physically tiring. You might feel more hungry. You might need to sleep more because you're actually, building these pathways in your brain. I think it's also super important to some extent normalize this. So everybody goes through periods of resistance or fear or lack of clarity. And it's not just the modern world that's doing that to us. It's our evolutionary wiring. So the brain wants to keep us safe for our survival. So it will introduce elements of fear to prevent you taking risks that could be damaging. But what we need to understand in the modern world is that we can take healthy risks that will actually lead to better outcomes. But sometimes the old evolutionary wiring isn't in sync with the fact that that's not actually dangerous necessarily in the world that we live in.
I have a question on this from my own personal experience. So the new Deep Imaginings we're putting out, I've been processing a similar version to them until we actually recorded them. I had been testing it out for a good probably 2 months while also microdosing. Have you done a lot of research yet, Dr. Tara, on microdosing and neuroplasticity?
I haven't, because you're far ahead with that in California and the States than we are. So I know that I have to because it's going that way, but I can't say that I have so far. The only thing that I would say, just from the general reading that I've done, is that when you take a substance, even if it has the potential to induce neuroplasticity, you don't have much control over that. So you also need to be doing the work, because otherwise, how do we know where that neuroplasticity is going to, happen in the brain? Because we need to remember that neuroplasticity can be bad as well as good. So, if you're obsessing over an X or you've got a negative thought pattern, then what you don't want is that the substance that's inducing neuroplasticity is helping that pathway.
This is so important to talk about. Well, because I have quite a few friends that are they're loosely talking about microdosing and how it's helping with their manifestation practice, but there isn't really any direction. I think they're just taking it and like going about their day, and they're like, wow, I'm feeling so heart-centered. And it kind of gets back into that old sort of spiritual bypass. So like my heart feels softer, basically I'm positive is what I hear when I'm reading that. So like my process, and I just want to be really clear with people, I've been processing the work on microdose and taking a full month off, and it's been equally as effective for me. So it's not like you have to have the microdose by any means, but for example, there was a good month that I was doing it, microdosing. And then at the top of it, I was going through the journal prompts, just like we're doing in this challenge. And I was doing mostly what is now the unblocking, deep imagining, and really getting to a very, very clear root of a very specific trigger. And I was doing this at least 4 to 7 days a week. I was just like really hammering home, and it's been profound at what's been manifesting since. However, the really interesting thing that I noticed based on what we were just talking about and you were saying is, because I was using bilateral stimulation, I was using a little bit of somatic naturally, and really, really targeting one specific trigger. It was so fascinating to me how much faster it feels that new positive belief that I'm putting in, that new cognition that I'm imprinting, is taking root so much faster than any other process I've ever done before. And then the crazy thing is, just like you guys are doing in the Unblocked DI, when we're tapping in that new positive belief, it's wild that when I would come up against processes that they would challenge it, let's say, it was so wild how it was already so rooted, and it would come back to me, let's say, naturally as, say, an affirmation. Let's say somebody who's walking down the street doing affirmations all day long, their intention is to like hopefully make that into a neural pathway. It was wild that with this unblocked new DI, and then of course through the period of microdosing, when say I would be faced with a mirror that would challenge the new positive belief, very naturally, my brain, like an affirmation without me giving it any thought whatsoever, would be like, no, actually, this is correct. So it's just crazy to me as we're talking about, that process of a new neural pathway. What are your thoughts on that? Is it that we're getting more targeted? And so my brain is just like, no, your authentic self is just happening a lot quicker, and those new neural pathways are taking root, and the roots are stemming out. Like, what's going on there?
I mean, I think the point is pretty much what I said before, that it's very clear from the way you've described it that you've done it very intentionally. You've spent a lot of time on it, doing the repetition. So you know where you're directing the pathways. My concern is that spiritual bypass, which is that I microdose, but I'm not intentional about where I want those connections to happen. It's the same as kind of creating a fantasy of the life that you want and sitting on the couch and waiting for it to come true. So you haven't done that. You've taken action, you've set intention, you've been thoughtful about it. Like you said, if I then, take a period of time off and I'm just as intentional, then I get very similar benefits. So it's really doing it properly rather than kind of half-heartedly or in a very sort of avoidant spiritual bypass kind of way.
Yeah. And even if I'm relooking at the steps that you've introduced of unblocking, I was doing every one of those in that process. I was doing the journaling, getting very specific, with that one trigger, taking it through the deep imagining. So that's the focused attention. The journaling was raised awareness. And then in real life, when I would be faced with a scenario that would usually trigger me in the same way, already oddly, my brain, I guess that's the deliberate practice, but my brain was already like, nope, not going to fall into the old patterns because this is the new belief. So that was the deliberate practice. And then what I really do is revisit the journal often of those raised awareness prompts and findings that I had. I guess what I'm saying is the new process just works really well.
And I feel like the fourth part, accountability, is looking back and reading your own handwriting, which, you can't run away from, where you've said the things that you've said. And whether they were triumphs or pitfalls, it's really facing yourself. And that's true accountability.
And I'm also thinking to create that new neural pathway, you need repetition and emotional intensity. With the Unblock DI in specific, there is so much emotional intensity because you are focused on one core wound. And it's so rooted and so layered that probably spiderwebs out to so many places in your life. So the emotional intensity is so high. And it's also intense because you're connecting to a most magnetic version of yourself, which can feel emotional intensity on the super positive spectrum as well. And then you were saying you were doing it 4 to 7 times a week.
Yeah.
So at that, I'm like, oh, okay, it must be because of that repetition and emotional intensity. Those two things are really helping create those new neural pathways.
Yeah, and I guess one thing, and maybe this is something you can dissect a little bit too, Dr. Tara, is when I would get down to the root, it always came back to childhood, obviously. We talk about that all the time. And in that moment when I was, like we say often, getting a healing, it was so interesting because I found, and maybe the microdose influenced this a bit, but again, I did this a full month without microdosing. And I found that most often than not, like in our safe DI, when I think of my safe person, it's usually infinite, universe, God, source. And what's interesting is every time I would find one trigger, I'll give an example of one of them where, I was with my inner child and my inner child felt so undeserving that it couldn't even be held or anything. And I had to bring in that source energy, that safe person that we have in the safety eye that we all find through resourcing. And every single time I realized when I was getting a healing, it was basically universe, God holding me. And no matter what, you're always taken care of. You're always held. You're always safe. You're always abundant, and not in a spiritual bypass way. It was like as if my mother or father, is doing that for me. And so I wonder, I would love to hear your thoughts on that, Dr. Tara, because kind of every healing ended up with the same thing, basically universe holding me and infinite conscious connection. What do you think about that? In that stage of the healing process, I'm sort of seeing the same thing, not even on purpose. It's just what felt like the ultimate healing. Basically, I'm coming in at the new neural pathway in many different spiderwebbed ways, but continuing to imprint one specific thing in the healing process. Did that help speed up the process, you think?
I love that. I mean, I think my first thought really is that it could be very different for different people. So, what we always want to be careful about doing is giving our examples, but saying that, it can be very different for different people. I feel that what I really loved about this unblocked work was that it was so specific. So we were taking like a really tiny specific thing. And so I honestly think it could be on the spectrum, given how the brain works, from it always being God, source, universe, so that you have a theme that you can always come back to. Equally, I've heard people say, and this is how it works for me sometimes with inner child, is that it's me as the parent that I would have been to that child.
Yeah.
And that's very empowering too, because then you feel like, okay, I've got this. And that sort of has a double impact. And I would say, having not microdosed, that I have also gone from kind of finding that I had to make a conscious effort to be that parent myself to now immediately being like, it's okay, I've got you, it's okay, like without even thinking about it. So I think it can be anyone from yourself to somebody real that, you feel safe with.
Or like we say in the DI, a guide or just your highest self, like any version.
Yeah, all the way up to the infinite consciousness, which it is anyway, right? But it's just how people embody that in their mind when they're with that safe person.
From a neuroscience perspective, do you think, because ultimately, and I love that we clarify that for people, everybody's going to have their own version. Do you think because I was seeing the same healing at the root of all of these triggers I was working through, not even forced, it's just what I'd come back to, that was speeding up the process?
I imagine that if we had 3 or 4 or 5 different healings for the things that we were dealing with, it would be more complicated for the brain. The brain likes simplicity. So if there's one source that you can always go back to, that's easier. And actually, if you compare it to the sort of more rational, scientific things like it's your thoughts that create your perspective on the world and the world that you live in, that's your thought. And that's your core thought that's going to help you with everything that you might encounter. And so, yeah, I think a lot of people would envy you that you've just crystallized that so well into one thing. From the efficiency point of view for the brain, that completely makes sense. But I think it's also fine if it's not that for everyone.
Completely. We have so many pent up brain questions for you.
I know.
I'll hand it back to you, Jessica.
Well, yeah, I was just going to say on the bringing sort of the safe person in during the DI, I think is really fascinating because I think you can shift it at any time. I just want to give licensing to people for that as well, that like you could, utilize the infinite God source, whatever, or you could utilize a magnetic parent or yourself or whatever it is, lean on whatever you were needing at the time. For the sake of the challenge, I'd refer back to one person through the whole thing. But it's interesting because for me, I've worked through like an abandonment wound. And so when I go in, I always bring up my highest version of self because it reinforces that I'm never abandoned, because I'm always with me and I can always connect to me. I can always see that. I'm like, oh, I'll never be left because I'm here with you. So it's interesting how your intuition kind of knows what type of safe person you need for your healing at that time.
Just for example, with what you've shared, Lacy, somebody might have to believe in God for that to be the thing that they feel. So I think for some people, it being themselves is just so beautifully encapsulated by Jessica, which is I'm always with me. So if you aren't of the belief that the infinite consciousness and the source and God is always with you, then that wouldn't work for you. But if you are of that belief, then it would work incredibly.
Agreed. So I'm quickly interrupting this episode to invite you, if you're ready to start your manifestation journey, or if anything you've heard in our manifestation episodes has piqued your interest to begin. We have a la carte workshops in everything from the basics bundle, which is what we recommend to everyone who starts. It's the formula that actually teaches you how to manifest, unblocked inner child, and unblocked shadow. We also have a la carte workshops on love and money. But the real gem is the Pathway membership because it encompasses every single workshop we have. It's a year-long membership with full access to the few a la carte offerings we have and exclusive workshops not available anywhere else, such as the daily practice, which is what everybody in the Pathway uses, hopefully at least 3 times a week to daily, in order to truly create the new neural pathways that one needs in order to manifest, and houses the library of our Deep Imaginings, which is our unique hypnosis process that allows you to get into your subconscious and overwrite those old neural pathways, creating the new ones.
And right now we have our biggest membership sale for the summer going on, where you can access some of the cheapest offerings for the Pathway for the entire year. This is for new or returning members only. It is not valid for any active plans. If you are up for a renewal soon, an email will be on the way. But for any of the new or returning members, you can spin the spinner and receive a code. That code gives you a special discount that you can use for the 12-month membership commitment. Again, this is a limited time offer for our summer sale that will only be available until July 15th. And right now we are in the middle of our unblocking challenge. You can join and start at any time, where we're taking our core limiting belief and working through it from various different angles and deep imaginings each week to really get on the other side of that core wound and plant a new empowering belief and connect with our manifestations on the other side. You can click the link in the show notes or on the To Be Magnetic website to spin the spinner and enter into the Pathway for the lowest rate of the summer.
Okay, now back to the episode. One thing I think that on this topic that's interesting is, talking about the aligned action, new deep imagining. What are the main reasons why people are stunted into taking aligned action and making those changes? And B, have we solved some of that in this deep imagining, creating these resource things like a safe person, and tools?
Yeah. So, I think two things. One is in the deep imagining, you get to face what is that thing preventing you? Is it resistance? Is it fear? Is it scarcity, lack of clarity, and kind of move through those feelings. And then the other piece is you have your safe person, you have your support, but also mental rehearsal, I think is really important. We know athletes have done this before meets and competitions. And I know we've touched on this in another podcast, but I think it's applicable to bring back up here for anyone just listening in. Having that script or that visual or that 5 cents cued of like what the scenario could be like in your head actually prepares you for the action you're going to take.
First, what do you find, Dr. Tar, to be the main reasons why people can't, and then explaining why that's so beneficial?
Yeah, so I was going to go back to like the exact words that we've already used, which are resistance, fear, scarcity, lack of clarity. They all come back to fear of the unknown and uncertainty being the worst thing for your brain to deal with. Your brain is actually more able to deal with a negative outcome than it is with uncertainty. So once you understand that, that's really key. There's a book that I really like that I've read 3 or 4 times, and I feel like I get a different insight from it each time because we're at different stages of our life. It's Who Moved My Cheese by Dr. Spencer Johnson. And one of the questions he asks is, what would I do if I wasn't afraid? And so that allows you to do a mental rehearsal very safely, just at home by yourself, not actually doing anything. If I wasn't afraid, what would I do? And for me, it certainly gave me the insight that taking that first step is more scary than what might happen. Now, that's not always going to be the case because there could be examples where there could potentially be very negative outcomes. But if we're talking about things like starting up your own business or starting dating again or, asking for a pay rise, then it's not a huge danger to your life, hopefully, to do some of those things. And it's anything from if you were going to give a talk or go for an interview and you've just seen the room where you're going to be beforehand, all the way up to imagining yourself going through the ideal scenario for what it is that you're trying to achieve, so that both that your brain has some expectation of what that could feel like, and also that you've primed it for success. It's basically all about trying to remove uncertainty as much as possible. So, priming yourself for success really works for some people. For some people, really raising awareness of all the potential barriers to success means that once you start walking on that path, and maybe there are some obstacles in the way, that you've already thought about how you might deal with them. And people can also do both, whether it's visualization or writing it down or talking it through with a friend. It's taking away as much uncertainty as you can. This could happen, that could happen, this could be the outcome. This is the worst case scenario, this is the best case scenario. All of those things help, because even just imagining what might happen makes your brain more mentally prepared for whatever will happen than if you avoid it. And often with resistance and fear and lack of clarity, we avoid entering that scenario or even thinking about it.
What are the different types of people? Because for me, I fall into the category when I can look at what would happen if I wasn't afraid, for example, and run through it all. There's a piece of me that's like, let's just push through and try all of the things. I get sick of something up to a point and then I'm like, let's go. So what are the different archetypes of people that have resistance to things, resistance, fear? Are there different types of people that this is how one person tackles aligned action, this is how one type of person can tackle it, etc.?
Well, this is a great point to even mention because we got this question a lot. People that have intrusive thoughts, people that are neurodivergent, ADHD, borderline, PTSD, OCD. How do those types of people tackle this if they have these really intense, rooted, almost like a negative bias or obsessive thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, even before you mentioned, several different types of people, I was thinking that the answer to Lacy's question is that there are almost as many different types of people as there are people. But,
wow.
I mean, yes, there are archetypes, whether it's introverted versus extroverted or emotional versus more rational. So we could create archetypes. But what I think is more helpful is understanding that self-knowledge is key. So let's just put aside those specific neurodivergent things at the moment. But whether you're neurodivergent or neurotypical, understanding and honoring the cycles and rhythms of your own mind and body, I think, is a very good place to start, because there are times where I've just manifested 1, 2, or 3 things and I feel like the most magnetic person on the planet. And that's a great place to move forward from without being afraid. And then there are times where I feel demotivated and I procrastinate and I'm, not manifesting anything. And what's really helped me is understanding that whether it's because I'm tired or it's hormones or I've been triggered by something in the real world, that there's a time and a place where you can really go for it and, sort of feel like you can run through any obstacle. And there's a time, like I said, for various reasons and across various personality types, that you might need to retreat and recharge. And the more you understand the state that you're in mentally, physically, emotionally, everything, the more you can make both good decisions about when you can charge forward and really go for it like that, and also when you need to be kind to yourself and say, okay, this probably isn't a time that I'm going to achieve the best result if I now just run forward and jump off a cliff. So maybe it's a good idea for me to go back, do some reprogramming, do the unblocked DIs, and just, allow that to really flourish in my brain and then start again.
It's great advice.
And I think just to touch on the, the neurodivergent people, what I feel really strongly is that if you're dyslexic, you see letters differently to how I see them. If you're ADD, then your focus is different to the next person's. But I've seen a lot of really successful people learn to manage and live with the neurodivergency. And so that's exactly the same applies to manifestation and unblocking, which is if you know yourself, you can do this work and get a lot out of it. If you haven't quite got there yet, then yes, it might be harder. But I still feel like, working on inducing positive changes in your brain through hypnosis and neuroplasticity is always going to make you feel better and more in charge of your life than if you don't do those things.
Yeah, so kind of what I'm hearing with that too is just you may approach the work a little bit different, make it your own, make it work for you. I know with my fiance, when he has guided prompts in the DIs, his brain starts to wander. He has ADHD. And so he'll listen to it and journal at the same time to try to make it work for him. And then he'll do his own sort of reprogramming in silent meditation. So when he's by himself, he'll just basically think about, okay, what did I cover in journaling from this DI? What were the messages? What were the prompts? Okay, now I know what I need to reprogram, and he'll just go and do a meditation and sit and hold himself and do inner child reparenting. So it's you kind of have to be your own pattern reader. We always say that, but it's almost like be your own guide, be your own guru with this work. Take the tools and figure out how to make them work specifically for you, because everyone's going to be so different. And don't force something if that way of doing it isn't working. Just open your mind to a different possibility of what you could do to make it work for you.
100%.
And also, if you can't do that and you want to work with one of the coaches, do you have people that specialize in working with neurodivergent people?
Well, the really big piece here that we haven't fully gotten to announce is that we've brought Janelle on for people who are needing a little bit more specialized therapeutic help.
Yeah, Janelle, you guys know, our EMDR, marriage licensed family therapist who we've collaborated with on the DIs, and we're getting to offer some really fun, intensive EMDR sessions that you guys can book with her because she has the knowledge of TBM and be able to take those blocks and those roots through that. So that'll be really, really exciting. And we'll talk more about that soon.
Exciting.
And then one more thing on the intrusive thoughts, because we got this question when we did the Q&A. This person wrote, "What's the science behind intrusive anxious thoughts? I've recently discovered the root of my feelings being undeserving. Although I unblock and find expanders in states of anxiety when I get intrusive thoughts, it goes back to, who do you think you are to do this? You can't do this. And they feel so real to me. I just convince myself I'm delusional for even having an idea that I could do it. And then I just go back to more unblocking. Is there a way to stop these thoughts in their tracks to soothe? Any tips around that?
So intrusive thoughts are on a spectrum, and intrusive may be a strong word, but to some extent, we've all been there. Who do you think you are? You can't do this. I mean, I've certainly experienced that in my past. I feel that being able to stop these in their tracks and soothe yourself immediately is a very higher function of the brain for somebody who has, I'm thinking like the Dalai Lama probably can do that, but I'm not sure that I can, for example. So I feel a sense from this question of having high standards and being quite hard on yourself, especially if you have serious intrusive thoughts. So I would go back to what I said about, honoring the rhythms and cycles of your body and your mind, and knowing that you have good days and bad days, and probably just soothing yourself a little bit like the example that Jessica gave, in whatever way works for you when you really need that, going back to your safe person. And then understanding that there are days where it's less intrusive and you're more capable of achieving the things that you want. And really, a phrase we use here is make hay whilst the sun shines. So, really go for your manifestations at the times that you're feeling not delusional about the ideas and visions that you have for your life. And just really like recharging and accepting the safety, receiving it, trying to minimize the uncertainty and intrusive element at the times that feels really hard. I mean, I would never recommend trying to push through to manifest when you're feeling that low.
Yeah. And I think, something I've experienced when I worked with people in the past, when you have a lot of abuse trauma, you tend to imprint a lot of those beliefs, like, who do I think I am? I'm not worth, the stuff, etc. And so I think also working side by side with a professional, may it be an intensive when it's coming up with Janelle or somebody else, like my therapist that we've shared 2 episodes with her on. She's decently versed in this work and wonderful, and, could just take it a little bit deeper as long as you need until you can get into more of a baseline space to roll with it yourself.
Completely agree.
And I could just see people being like, maybe discouraged. Just trust that your body is healing in the time and the space that it's supposed to be doing that. And your mind and your subconscious thoughts, all of that is in perfect timing. You are doing the best you can. Your brain's doing the best it can. Just be gentle with yourself, because I think so many times we're like, oh, but I have to do it this way, or I'm not going to manifest as quickly as I possibly can if I don't do this right now. Maybe exactly what you need for your manifestation practice is to go gentle and be soft on yourself before you go into any heavy unblocking. So just keep that in mind too.
And remember too that even passing one test, like taking one aligned action, finding one fragment expander, already creates situational magnetism. So there's no way, anytime you take one step in the direction of your authentic, worthy self, even if you're not in the space to do heavy unblocking, or maybe you're taking a little break, this process is never stalled. The universe is co-creating with you at all times. So it doesn't have to just be a really heavy experience. It can be even the smallest steps that start to create small things coming through.
Yeah, I was going to add that sometimes it's about baby steps. Sometimes it's definitely much bigger things, but it's okay if it's baby steps. And what I like to call doing experiments. So, when you're feeling stronger and you're going to do something quite bold or take a risk, think of it as an experiment, so that even if it doesn't work out how you might really ideally want it to, that you will at least learn something from it. And then you can journal that. And then that's something that you can look back and read later and see what happened, what happens when you try various experiments.
I love the experiment idea. Yeah, I think that's really, really interesting to see the experiment and testing and trying different things. Okay, from a neuroscience and manifestation perspective, sometimes people will ask, can I just take aligned action? Do I have to do the reprogramming work? So this is my experimental guess, right? This is my hypothesis, is that when we try to take the action without the reprogramming work, we don't have any neural pathways laid for a high self-worth version to take that action. So it's almost like brute force and trying to create a new pathway, but just in the conscious state, which is longer and harder to do than creating one in the subconscious state. What do you think about that, taking action without any reprogramming or conscious pre-thought?
I think we should certainly link a podcast episode because we have an entire podcast, I feel, that covers this, where we talk really heavily about if you're just taking all these action steps and expanders, but you're not actually reprogramming, that it can only go so far.
And I'd probably add to that, if every action that you're taking is working out amazingly, then you probably are programmed really well. But if your life isn't panning out exactly as you'd like it to, then you probably need to reprogram.
Yeah, I mean, we see that a lot. One of the two situations where people will write in and they're like, I'm unblocking all of this and I keep doing the work, etc., but I'm not manifesting anything. And that automatically tells me, I'm like, cool, you're not finding expanders and you're not taking action, or we'll actually see the opposite. And I think the example, the person we gave earlier is guilty of this a lot, where she takes a lot of aligned action and is around a lot of expanders, but isn't always unblocking. And so that's why we make a point to say the trifecta has to be in motion simultaneously to manifest, even if they're fluidly dancing with each other in different ways, they all have to be in motion to really see results. I also believe, the example, the person that we, gave earlier is an extremely magnetic person naturally. I mean, she was raised in an environment that always told her, you are perfect love, you're good, etc. But because we're all authentic souls, we all have some unblocking to do. We just do subconsciously, no matter what. It's just the thing. But she's a perfect example right now that she's at a space where she desires a little bit more in love and money. And she's getting to bear witness how far you get just being magnetic from taking aligned action and having expanders and being around a lot of expanders. But there's also that other piece.
As a neuroscientist who specializes in neuroplasticity, of course, a really driving belief for me is we can always be better. So, unless you want to plateau in your life, then that trifecta can only really elevate you. So there may be times that you don't think you need to, or you don't want to, but when you feel that you have the time and the motivation, then it's only going to make your life better.
I agree.
100%. And I mean, one telltale sign too, this might be for someone who's not unblocked enough or not taking enough aligned action, but if you have the same pattern reoccurring over and over again, there is more stuff to be done. People sometimes don't recognize that. I've seen other friends have that as well, where they're like, oh, this same situation happened. And I'm like, do you want that situation to happen? They're like, no. I'm like, okay, so let's take a look at it. What's going on here? Look at this dynamic. There's more to unblock or look at, or what's being projected out? What need are you trying to get met? Why is this occurring? So that's one really telltale sign of okay, there's more something to be done in this dynamic.
There's this psychic that I work with, a tarot reader. She's not a future projector. And I actually just started working with her not too long ago because she's who helped the friends of my dad pick our now rehomed border collie, Odie. He couldn't, unfortunately, stay on their land because he was getting these really, really bad burrows that were getting stuck in his body, and they had to rehome him, which was very sad for them. And we had been manifesting either an Australian Shepherd or a border collie for a long time. And he kind of is a mold of both in a way because he's merled. Anyways, long story short, when we were going to get this puppy, I said, can I get the psychic's number that my dad's friend works with, who picked Odie because he is pure love, just like she said. She was she told her, this dog will be pure love. And I know all dogs are like that, but this dog's like an alien of pure love. So I grabbed her number literally to just help us pick this next puppy. And I've now since worked with her a ton and gifted many people sessions with her. She's really incredible. And as she likes to say, I'll call her about something and she's like, oh, are we picking another rescue animal together? But she always kind of tunes into your energy. She reads cards. And so at the top, she'll give a little synopsis of like what's up right now and in the next 30 days. And as she likes to always say to me, looks like you're still dealing with that thing you thought you unblocked. I think there might be a blind spot.
Oh my gosh, I need this woman's number. This
I'll give it to you. I'm tempted yet to share her with the masses because I like that I can get in with her like the next day if I need to.
Yes.
So soon I will share her contact. But in the meantime, I'm liking that I can get in with her decently before 3 months.
She'll book out really
She'll
quick.
book out really fast. One day soon we'll share her. But in the meantime, until I'm done picking all these rescue animals. But yeah, I like that. There might be a blind spot. And so that's the way that I look at that.
I love that. Okay, 2 more little questions before we jump here. One, we got this question from the community. How do I discern between fighting my old subconscious self that wants to stay small and a decision that will actually take me down the wrong path? So I know we talked about, okay, it's uncertainty and fear that is causing us from taking that aligned action. But for the people who that uncertainty feels like actual fear, and it feels like, oh, no, we actually shouldn't take that step. That's not good. Versus that is just their subconscious trying to like protect them and keep them small. Are there any little tips or things that they could think, like a checklist or something that they could think on that's like, okay, wait, is this in alignment with my highest self, or is this just my fear loop trying to protect me?
Is it fair to link anxiety in with this as well? I've been experiencing, I think mine has been hormonally rooted, in fact, recently, but a tremendous amount of micro anxiety that has frozen me from taking some aligned action that I'm finally feeling out of that anxiety zone. But fear and anxiety, how they might be tied. Obviously, we have the 2 deep imaginings that cover those, but actual fear and anxiety. What are your thoughts on that?
I just want to start by making sure I've understood this question properly, because are we asking about the difference between old default pathways and something that's actually potentially bad or dangerous? Because, I understand people want to be aware of the difference between them, but surely you wouldn't choose either of those options.
I think so for them, they're saying, okay, if it is the old pathway that I don't want, I'm going to push through and take the action. But if it's scary and if it is like, wait, this actually isn't for me, or this is dangerous for me, if this is unsafe, I'm not going to take the action.
So to me, from the neuroscience point of view, that's the difference between instinct and intuition. So intuition is coming from your most authentic, aligned self. And instinct are those shortcuts that sometimes the primal brain wants us to take because there's actual real danger. So starting to distinguish between instinct and intuition is very difficult. Journaling is one way of doing it, which is essentially running those 2 options through your own logical system. But because of the interaction between the emotional pathway and the logical pathway, that can be very clouded. So this is where I actually suggest, sure, journal and, sit down and try to think of it as rationally as possible. But this is where it's really good to speak to someone else, preferably someone that knows you from your real life, or someone that's got to know you because they're a therapist or a coach, and they can help you to raise awareness of your different thought patterns.
And then clarifying anxiety and fear versus just your subconscious. Aren't they tied though?
Yeah, it's very, very hard to unpick that yourself. I personally really think that therapy is the only way to really unpick that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the science between the mind and the heart and the gut needing to all be in sync for that intuition to be as clear as it possibly can.
Yeah, so I'm using the terms mind, heart, and gut because this is something that most people are very familiar with and it makes sense really easily. But what I'm actually talking about is the logical pathway of your brain, the emotional pathway of your brain, and the intuitive pathway of your brain. We like to talk in systems and pathways rather than say it's the sort of, the prefrontal cortex, the limbic system, and then the sort of brain-gut connection, because it's even more complex than that. And they all interact with each other. They regulate each other or not. So dysregulated emotions are really the enemy of being your most authentic, aligned self. It's important to understand when that's the case. Like I said, understanding the rhythms and cycle of your body. So, for example, Lacy sharing an example that her micro-anxieties are probably very hormonal based can help her to distinguish that from other types of anxiety that aren't hormonal based, or these sort of, instincts that are very primal and to do with our survival, or her actual intuition. So that's the neuroscience explanation, which is that, we have many, many different pathways in our brain, but these are 3 very obvious ones. And just a really nice kind of somatic way of trying to access those is literally putting your hands on your head and then putting your hands on your heart and putting your hands on your gut and really asking the question to each of those different parts of your body. But it just allows you to sink deeper from the logical part to the emotional part to the intuitive part, just like a DI takes you from conscious to subconscious.
And I think they say heart and gut too, because there are pathways to, what is it, the emotional part to your gut or the emotional part to your heart?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't even separate it like that, but like saying there's an emotional part. There are a lot of neurons around your heart that govern how fast it beats and how deeply it beats. And that's connected to what's going on in the emotional systems of your brain and the release of factors like cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline. So, they're just so intimately connected. And then the connection between the gut and the brain it's bidirectional. So the state of your gut affects your mood and the way that you think, and then how stressed you are affects your gut. And that happens through the vagus nerve. It happens through chemical messages in the blood. It happens through hormones. It happens through other nerves. So it's really, really complex. But that's why I like that model of simplifying it to your head, your heart, and your gut, because it really goes with the kind of levels of hypnosis that you go through as well. And it's just about accessing data that's in your body.
Also why we included those in the new DIs.
Exactly. But I'm still going to say that, really picking apart, is it true fear or anxiety? Is it an instinct? Is it my intuition? That just takes such a level of self-understanding. I feel like we're all on that journey, but, we're all much better at it now than we were in our 20s, for example.
And even getting back to, the journaling and looking back at things you journal on, if you journal down on maybe low stakes moments of following your intuition or your anxiety and say, okay, when I followed this piece that said, go to the grocery store, and I wasn't sure if that was my intuition or not, but I did, and then something beautiful happened, maybe take that down and say, okay, here are all the ways that my intuition spoke to me, and this is what it felt like in my body, and this is how it came through. And then when you're at those very high stakes moments of like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I should take this action or not, go back and look at that list. And that might help shake some things loose and bring some clarity of whether or not it is intuitively you should step through the fear, or if this fear is not for you at this time.
Well, I sort of mentioned doing experiments, and it's basically about absolutely doing low stakes examples of following your intuition to get to the point where, if somebody asked me now, how do you make the most important decisions in your life? I would say I live and die by my intuition. But it's taken me decades to get to that point. But I also have very good examples, even from my much younger days, of where, that worked, from small things to large things. But perhaps the trust muscle wasn't as strong as it is through having more repeated examples of that working out.
Absolutely. Well, this has been such a good episode. We've covered so many things. I'm like, I just feel like I've taken a master class.
You have me on the side texting Jessica saying, man, conversations with Dr. T are so dynamic.
I was thinking it's always so good. It's always so good. I think each time we're like, this episode was so good. But we enjoy it. And I think that really, it really matters and it really shows. So
yeah, I think, we all are just so curious about this stuff. So we're so grateful.
Yeah, we all learn so much when we speak to each other. So it's a real win-win.
It's amazing.
Well, thank you both so much, and we'll have to have you back on soon. Everyone, take your aligned action, do the aligned action DI. Next week, I believe it should be dropping in the portal by the time this airs. So yes, let us know how you're liking it and what resistance or fear you are going to step through towards your aligned action. Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, so I wanted to share with you guys a little mini manifestation story that came through. And it was actually a manifestation that I called in with my partner, Daniel. So TBM had off for a week last week, and I really, really needed some disconnection in nature, to be surrounded by water, whether that was an ocean, a lake, a pool, something, and just be able to do my DIs in the morning, journal, take a slow morning with a cup of coffee, be in nature all day long, and then go out to fun dinners at night. This was just like on my mind, really, really, really craving it. And Daniel didn't have off as much time as I did. He only had a long weekend. So it was kind of tricky finding a spot that wasn't full-blown vacation, that he could also just work remote or work from coffee shops or things like that. And I could go adventure during the day. And I'm not kidding you, we probably have an itinerary for every spot up and down the West Coast at this point, because we really looked in everywhere, but nothing felt just right. And you know that moment where the manifestation clicks, you're just like, oh, this is the thing. I'm so excited. We weren't really finding that feeling, and I was honestly getting pretty stressed out because it was getting really down to the wire. So I was going through the unblocking challenge, and in my safe place, I also kept going back to this feeling in nature, this feeling of just being surrounded by it, kind of held by it. And a lot of times during the Deep Imagining, it says like, sink into it as if you're floating. And I always think, I'm an earth sign, Capricorn. I always think about floating on the surface of the earth by the grass or in the sand. And it just feels so comforting. And as I was going through the unblocking challenge, one of it was that I didn't need to emotionally caretake other people. I can take care of myself, and carving out time for vacation was exactly that. I wasn't going to answer personal DMs on Instagram. I wasn't going to do any work. I was really going to put it down and take care of myself, which is really the core wound that I was working through, which is kind of funny and cool that I got to take action with it. But what wound up happening is I did the fear DI, nervous that, oh no, what if I couldn't find the right spot? What if I couldn't nurture myself? How can I still be there for myself? And what came through in that DI was that all my needs are already being taken care of, and I just have to surrender. I had to stop controlling and try to micromanage the perfect thing, and the right spot will just kind of present for me. Just be intentional about how you want to feel in that space and be present. That just kept coming through in the DI so many times. Just be present, be present. You don't need to control. You're okay. You're okay. And I had such a release after doing that fear DI. And immediately after, my coworker, Grace, who you guys know from the Expanded podcast, messaged me that she's going to be traveling over the holiday and we could stay at her place for that entire time in nature, in Topanga, 10 minutes from the ocean. Exactly what I wanted to manifest, and near coffee shops so Daniel could work and I could go adventure during the day, and cute little restaurants at night. It was the most kismet manifestation. I was so, so happy and so grateful to Grace. I was so excited. Her spot is such a dream, and we had the most perfect, restful vacation. So I just want to share that with you guys, because even in the middle of the challenge isn't over yet. And this came through, what was it, week 3 on the fear DI. It wasn't like the biggest thing on my list. It was like a co-manifestation with my partner. But even then, the universe is guiding you to exactly what you need when you need it. So hopefully that expands you guys out there. I'm loving hearing all of your stories of what you guys are manifesting and unblocking. It is so beautiful and so powerful. And honestly, I tear up every time hearing all of the things that are coming through for you guys. So just keep going. Again, for anyone who hasn't started yet, it's not too late to start. This will be available in the pathway till September. And don't forget to tune into the live call on Tuesday, July 12th with Lacy and I, where we're going to be talking about aligned action, next steps for the challenge, and what's come through for the both of us so far. That will be coming out July 12th with Lacy and I for anyone who is a part of the challenge. So stay tuned, and we'll see you guys on the podcast next week.